What's going on, everyone? This is Moose and Brian here from OccupyFantasy.com, at OccupyFantasy on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm your host, Moose, at CFB_Moose on Twitter. It's where you can find me, the co-founder and data guru here at OccupyFantasy.com. Alongside with me is Brian, at BrianJesterFF on Twitter. He's co-founder and CEO of Occupy Fantasy. How's it going, Brian?
Always are in the negative, so we're off to a good start.
That's what I love about. I said this earlier about hockey, where it's like either your players either get flames or snowflakes. No in between. No, like that's just the way it is. The way hockey is scoring. So, very tilting, but very fun sport, I think. We're not here to talk about break down hockey. Here to talk about the week 12 of the $1 Million Mission. We take a look at how Brian's lineups did last week. Look at what the field did, and see if we can learn anything from them. So let's jump to it. Let's get started. Over on FanDuel, his Week 12, $4,050 in entries for $1,914 in winnings for a minus 53% ROI. Brian, I will say you've been creeping up. You were like literally at 99% losing. And you like 70, 60, 50, 53. Like, so you're climbing back up there.
Yeah, actually, I felt pretty good about the process this week overall, despite, once again, so my ROI was a little higher on FanDuel this week because I included Fournette in more of my stacks over there. And I also had some Joe Mixon because of his price on FanDuel and his touchdown equity. So did a little better on FanDuel than I did on DraftKings. And actually, this is one of the highest finishes I've had in a few weeks. I think I finished 44th in the kickoff, which is the $22 100K to first. So we were getting there. So not a bad result overall.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before. You just got to get to that 1%, 0.1%. Hope a couple coin flips go your way. And if we take a look at DraftKings, $5,100 in entries, $1,748 in winnings for a minus 66% ROI.
Yeah, so I had 0% mix in here. I think I had like four stacks with Fournette maybe, and most of those stacks didn't pan out well. So overall frustrating week because, and we'll get to this after we review all the results, but it's been 3 weeks out of the last month. I've X'd out some of the highest scoring running backs on the slate, which seems impossible to do when making 150 lineups, but it's been my superpower for the past month.
Yeah, it's like you're trying. It's like if you tried to do that, you couldn't do it.
No, I literally, like, if I had to pick who's the highest scoring player and then not use them, I couldn't do it. And somehow I've managed to do it 3 out of the last 4 weeks. So super fun.
Yeah. So if we take a look at how you've done year to date, a little under 100K in entries, a little under 60K in winnings for a minus 38% ROI.
Would be devastating if not for that UFC win recently, mentally. So that was always nice. Just looking back, I was actually looking back right before the show. Most of my spike weeks are generally 8 to 10 weeks apart, and the last one was week 3, so that's 9 weeks. We're right in that range. So, in theory, we should be getting a spike week pretty soon. I talked about it. I think I talked about it with our new Premium Showdown podcast co-host Davis Maddock when I chatted with him and Colin before the season started, and I said, basically based on my top 0.1% rates in different contest types, I'm able to figure out either how many times per season or year, or how many years it would take if we're talking Showdown, how often I can expect a win. And UFC, I said, based on the edge I have in my 0.1% finish rates, that I should be able to win 2 GPPs per year. I hit that. I had 200K UFC wins, and I expect 2, maybe 3 spike weeks per NFL season. We had 1 back in week 3, and so we got 6 weeks left to hit the other one, and it should happen, barring some insane variance.
The only thing that sucks is you've had the quote unquote bad variance for UFC where the 2 GPPs you won were of the smaller pools. If you hit the 3 to 500K GPPs, would be a whole different story.
Exactly. But I will literally never be the one to complain about the size of a GPP win after my first big one was the Millie. So I can't, definitely, I am not in a position to ever complain about that.
Definitely. And I do just want to take a quick step back, not to dig that knife any further. You did have the King of the Beach qualifier. That didn't go so well. So you're not going down to Miami. But,
Nope.
Yeah. So that
So
sucks.
that was, for those who are not aware, that was one of the 2 contests on DraftKings that I've been trying to qualify for this season. The championship, which is in week 15, I believe. Still got a couple more shots at trying to qualify for that. That's the 250 person live in Miami. The King of the Beach is a 2-round final where top 250 qualify. And I did have one ticket, and the first qualifier was this past weekend. Then the top 75 of those 250 head down to Florida this week for the championship. I think it's 200K to first. And I actually felt really good about my lineup, and pretty much every player sucked. So is what it is. I'm not too worried about it. Just obviously sucks for losing.
Exactly, yeah. And then we also talk about the $1 million mission. How we do in these DraftKings pools, the Pick'em and Survivor. So if we take a look at, if we get this off the screen here, we in Survivor, we are hashtag eliminated because Dallas decides to be like the worst possible team in the world.
There's 4% left in the Survivor. We started with 2,600 entries. We were down to just about 100. And again, we talked about it last week. We were in the perfect spot. We got upset, and it hurts, Moose. It hurts to get that close. I know you're feeling the pain too.
Yeah, it sucked pretty hard. What sucked even worse is we were so settled, and maybe this is a point we can talk about for a second. Is we've had Dallas circled for so long, right? Since like week 5 or whatever, for a while for this spot, right? Yep. So, at what point do you think our minds were just like tunnel vision on that? Because I'm not saying New England was a good play. That never crossed neither of our minds. But close to that game closed, I think 7.5, the same pretty much spread as Dallas. So, do you think, in hindsight, we should have at least considered New England, or do you still think Dallas was the right call? I still think Dallas was the right call to an extent when what's his name was ruled out, didn't meet the concussion protocol. I think we probably should have had a conversation then, but that never crossed my mind until after everything happened. So it's probably a biased statement for me to say.
Yeah, like Chris says in the chat, I think we were just tilting because we knew for a fact New England would be higher owned. We knew for a fact that there was another spot in week 16 or 17 we could have used New England, and I don't. The only thing I regret is our strategy with the 3 separate entries. We blew that for sure. Our strategy, once we had the 1 entry get deeper into the contest, I have no concerns with how we played it. It just sucks that we experienced the loss on Thanksgiving with friends and family around, which those type of situations you just want to solve in your basement by yourself.
Yeah, considering when like everyone else, like 90% of the people that were there had no idea what was actually behind it. They thought we were just like Dallas fans and rooting for Dallas. We're like, no, like we just lost our chance of $1 million. But one last thing about Survivor, then we'll move on. I did want to point out there was with the Circa Sports Survivor out in Las Vegas, the Thanksgiving Thursday was its own separate week, and there was one person who had 3 entries left in that. Did 2 on Dallas and 1 on the Raiders. Brian, just what do you think of that type of strategy for such a small week, to where you're guaranteed to lose 1 entry, but you at least advance to Sunday?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess, I mean, obviously, there's definitely an inflection point in the season on when you should do that. I never thought about when that would be. It feels too early, especially with a 7-point favorite. Maybe if it was a short week and you only had, there was only 3-point favorites to take, maybe then. I don't know. I think it's a viable strategy. I think it might be too early, but again, I definitely don't have the math behind it.
Yeah, me either. I thought it was an interesting point to raise. I saw that and wanted to ask you.
But someone did that with Chicago and Detroit too in that contest.
They did,
on
yes.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, which I feel like that part probably isn't optimal.
Yeah, I don't know, but then again, you're never going to take Chicago, and you're never going to take Detroit. So I kind of get it, but I don't know, that whole Thursday is its own separate week. Just introduces a whole new level of strategy to that contest.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, all the bad shit aside, we're here to finally talk about some good news. We finally got some good news over in the DraftKings Pick'em. We went 5-0. Throw the fireworks. I have confetti like over here. I'm sure you can see it. Trust me. Yeah, 5-0. Moved up like 275 spots. We're literally on the bubble. Top 135 get paid. We're 136. Brian, it was great. We finally crushed. It was a very good feeling.
Yeah, and not to be too results oriented, but we really honed in on our strategy, and we've been eyeing to take sharp teams that aren't being basically sharp teams in the betting markets that aren't popular in our pool. And we've done a fantastic job of identifying those spots. And most importantly, regardless of how the games have turned out, we've picked teams that have had sharp money behind them, but less than 15, less than 20% of the entries in our contest have selected them, which is all we can ask for. So we're going to continue to do that. We're 8 games out of first, which actually with 30 something games left. I mean, we're still within striking distance, and a min cash here is $2,500, so obviously a pretty nice little payday. And yeah, we're gonna continue to grind this. I'm feeling pretty good about it. Let's it'd be nice to get a sweat, right? Let's get it one more 5-0 week. We get into the top 50 with 6 weeks left, and then we're having some fun.
Yeah, it's crazy because we were at like 900th place or something like that, and we're like back then we were like, all right, let's see if we can just grind out, have a good couple weeks, and get a min cash. It just shows how important a 5-0 is. And I think the other thing that's important to show is sometimes, you're not getting the best number in sports betting. Yes, absolutely is key. But in something like this where there's a little bit of game theory, when Washington closed as I think a pick 'em or a 1-point underdog, but in our pool we had Washington minus a half a point. In reality, that really doesn't matter. But
no,
but people are going to go away from Washington. There's other spots that in theory look better where they say, oh, I can get a minus 5.5 point favorite when they were -3, when they're -7 now. I mean, that's probably good, but they're gonna say I'm not gonna pick a team where the line moved against them and I'm not getting a 1.5, but that 1.5 goes through 0 doesn't really matter.
Exactly, and it's very comparable to. As this is a DFS show, it's very comparable to taking a worse projected player, worse points per dollar in a tournament because of the ownership difference. And that's what we see here, right? Like a team like Washington, it was a great example of a team we felt had some sharp money behind them based on what we were reading and reading between the lines in the betting markets. And while their win probability may be like a couple percentage points less than a team whose line in the pool was a point or two off or a half point off from the actual betting market, but the difference in how many people selected them, if it's like 40% versus 5%, then the EV swings in our way. And that's the same way it goes for DFS tournaments where you get two guys, one projects a little bit worse and is a little bit worse value, someone you wouldn't consider for your cash games, but when they get 1/8 the ownership or something, that makes them a much better tournament play. So again, this all comes down to, obviously you need some math on your side, but in the end, as we try to preach here every week in our shows and our content, that game theory is a big part of it too. And sometimes it's not necessarily the projections math or the betting market math; it's the game theory and ownership math that's more important.
Yeah, you pretty much hit that on the head there. So let's jump over to the Fantasy Labs contest dashboard. You can check out at fantasylabs.com. Free resource that is pretty awesome. You definitely should go ahead and check that out. As I pull up the $20 Fantasy Football Millionaire maker, Brian, you kind of alluded to it earlier in the show. You're not really good at picking running backs. So
I thought I was good, dude. I thought I was really good.
Yeah. So so tell me about what your strategy was for running backs, how you ended up with basically nothing on Fournette and Mixon, and I guess we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'm curious to get your thoughts. I'm curious to get some of the thoughts of the people watching this. Whether you're watching it live, obviously you can comment in the chat, or afterwards comment on the video on YouTube, or hit us up in Discord. But to me, I mean, basically what I've been doing, and I've successfully for the past 3 years or so, is when building 150 lineups using our builder. I'm looking at definitely the stud running backs near the top of the model. I'm looking for the value guys, and there's always is generally a dead zone of guys who are in that, like, I would say 8 to 12 range in the model that aren't priced cheaply, right? They're like 6K to 8K. Don't usually have a ton of pass catching upside. Need to get there on a ton of touchdowns. The ownership isn't that great generally, which is another indicator, especially for the running back position. and I don't feel bad about fading them. And most of the time it works out. But Nick Chubb a few weeks ago put up a slate-breaking performance. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor against the Bills, slate-breaking performance, had zero exposure to him. And then Fournette and Joe Mixon this week, all in that 8 to 12 range in our model. Not a ton of ownership, and I thought, again, because what it comes down to me is like, do I want to get, match the field and or go over on every running back, or be less than the field on most of the running backs, which doesn't seem optimal. That's just trying to get exposure to every running back.
Yeah.
But I think the conversation, Moose, is like when you have these guys who have goal line roles, like Fournette does, like Jonathan Taylor does, like Nick Chubb does, and they're going to be 3% owned, like Taylor and Fournette were the last 2 weeks. Like, do you have to at least get 6 to 10% exposure of those guys just in case they have those slate breaking performances? Just in case. I mean, we talk about this in Showdown all the time, right? We say, the quarterbacks are popular MVPs, especially on FanDuel. The way to get leverage in tournaments, pray that the touchdown variance goes in favor of the running game instead of the passing game. That same concept could be applied on a high team total team, and it happened with Fournette. If he got 3-4 of the touchdowns at on a high team total team, and Brady doesn't get any, then obviously that's huge for his ownership. So just throwing it out there for conversation.
Yeah, like my strategy when I do the 150 max on FanDuel, the pooch, is, I start off by saying, is this running back over 10%? Put him in my pool. Yep. And I go from there, and I'll look and see which one of what the builder gives me with all the different rules and everything else that I have. And I try to match the field on that. I try not to go below that. I feel like having just 2 or 3 lineups with the running back in probably isn't a good idea, just because if that hits, you still need like every other player to hit,
right?
And it doesn't really make sense to me. So I'm thinking that for those type of backs that get the goal line work, that have a high chance of scoring several touchdowns when they're in that, I think you have to at least put them in your player pool, see how it fits, and if it works with what you're trying to do, I say do it. I wouldn't necessarily say go under the field if they're less than 10%. I don't necessarily think it's worth it to play 2-3% Fournette. Like, right. I just don't think and I definitely don't think it's worth it to play 20-30% Fournette either. So it's tough to find in that sweet spot. I know that's not the right answer. I know it's not like a right answer that you were looking for, but kind of all depends, I think, still.
Yeah, so Dot Betts is talking in the chat. It's been his Achilles heel every week, the running back position. What's your process? Who to put in your player pool? So I'll look right in DraftKings. It's definitely tougher because you can't just jam in the studs like you can on FanDuel, right? Mm-hmm. Like this past week, I was struggling to get even 10% of McCaffrey on DraftKings, where on FanDuel I had no problem getting 15% plus. And to me, it's like, okay, those guys obviously have slate breaking potential, right? McCaffrey, Dalvin, Eckler, those guys. Let's get 10 to 15% each, right? That should be enough exposure for those guys, even if it's a little bit under the field, right? Then we're looking for the value plays, the guys who are 10, 15% plus that are way cheaper. So this past week, I'm thinking, I'm drawing a blank. Go to my exposure list really quickly for running back, and then we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And to Dot Bet's next question, do you always put running backs in the game stack? And generally I don't, because like this past week, right? If you included Fournette and Brady stacks, you still probably lost because Brady scored 12, Godwin scored 5 or some shit, Evans scored less than 10. If the running back scores that much to get there, you're generally not going to win a GPP because it's taken away from the quarterback. I'll include it on the flip side. So like some of my best FanDuel lineups, the ones that did randomly have Fournette in it, were Wentz stacks, running them back with Fournette, because that makes sense to me, right? If Fournette does well, the passing game's not doing that great. Indy has to pass to catch up, and all of that makes sense to me. So I think running it back with a running back makes a lot more sense than including them in your quarterback stack. So like Dontrell Hilliard, the model loved. I was all over him. Miles Sanders was popular. Ty Johnson, relatively popular. James Robinson, those are the guys that were a little bit underpriced compared to the role, so they were easy to get in. But they ranked ahead of those guys like Fournette and Mixon. So when you could pay $1,000 less, $2,000 less for those guys than you can for Fournette or Mixon, that's where I start to hit a wall and find it tough to get those guys in.
Yeah, I mean, like Hilliard did well. Miles Sanders, the Eagles just like absolutely hate him. They just yeah. I don't know why they don't play him.
Refuse to give him the ball. Yeah.
Yeah, refuse. But like, not like these are still good plays. It's just the variance happened where, the person you didn't play scored 4 touchdowns or whatever, 40 points, whatever. That's tough.
Right. So okay. So go to so clear out my exposure and just look at the field ownership for running backs really quickly.
Let's see if I can figure out how to do that.
So while you're figuring that out, we got a couple questions here.
Nice.
Justin says, "Is running back with their defense still a thing?" Yeah, especially it's definitely less so in today's pass-heavy NFL. But yeah, it's still, if you think about the story you're telling, it makes sense. So yeah, it's not something I've forced, but it definitely is a little bit of correlation there. And then Johnny's asking about certain metrics for running backs, home, favorite, red zone, receptions, or you just rely on the model. And then he kind of answers the question himself. Yeah, the model takes all that into account. If I keyed on one specific thing, it would be double counting. So the model is all encompassing. So I try not to stray too far from those rankings.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see here. So yeah, so sorting by field percentage, have it up here for you.
Okay, so I'm looking now. So yeah, so Mixon 12%. I think we were a little low on that for our projected ownership. But yeah, so 7,500. And then where was Fournette? He was down to like 4% or something, right?
3.6%.
Okay, so Fournette I could get behind, right? He's 6,800. I get 68%. That's double the field. That's certainly enough to mix him into to different stacks and maybe get lucky that way. Mixon, I don't think I was ever going to be able to get 12% Mixon to match the field. And playing, like you said earlier, playing like 4 or 6% doesn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if I ever would have played Mixon. I think
you were never considering stacking Cincinnati. You were never, and it's hard to stack with a $7,500 running back that's necessarily didn't pop that well in the model.
Yeah. Again, he's had 2+ touchdowns in like 4 straight games or something crazy, and any running back that's touchdown dependent, the model is necessarily not going to like. But just thinking about that from a different angle, right? Like, in order to have a slate breaking performance, you need touchdowns. That's where they get their value. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It's just something I've been thinking about, and it's really every week. That's literally always the decision point for me. Those 8 to 12 range running backs that are not cheap, and they have a defined role. They get goal line work, but they're tough to fit in when you consider the values and the studs around them. So I do think, when they're less than 5% owned, like Taylor was, like Fournette was, I think you have to find a way. When they're 10% plus, that's where I think you can draw the line, and I think that's probably what I'll try to do moving forward.
Okay, and as we transition to our next segment about game stacks, some game stacks are expensive, some are cheap, and you actually tried a little bit different game stacks, and with this upcoming week, there's definitely ways you can 2-1, 2-0, 3-0, whatever. And so, about someone like Mixon, if you're not 3-1ing an expensive game stack, let's say you're doing a 2x1 and saving a little bit of salary on a cheaper stack, or even a 3x0, so you don't have to do that run back and potentially get like an expensive piece there. I think the strategy gets a little different, where you might be able to fit in a more expensive running back a couple of times with a stack like that. But does that make sense to essentially stack 2 different games? Whereas if you have a cheap stack and it allows you to fit in Mixon, does it really make sense to pair that stack with Mixon, where you need 2 completely different things to happen for those lineups to pop off?
Right, because what you're saying is, right, like in that scenario, you wouldn't get any Mixon really with your Brady stacks. You wouldn't get any Mixon with your Herbert stacks, right, just because of the way the pricing works out.
Yeah, and so if you have, let's say you're doing three game stacks, for lack of better words, expensive stack, cheap stack. All your Mixon is going to be with this cheap stack, so you're already basically blocking off a quarter of your lineup that's dependent all on each other, and they're not even playing in the same game.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, and that's why we built like the high randomizer to evenly distribute these guys. So
Yeah.
yeah, I get it, and maybe that's what you look for, right? Let's say I try to include Mixon, I build lineups, I go to the lineups tab, and I just type Mixon's name in to see which lineups he's coming in. If they're all with Jalen Hurts and Daniel Jones, then it lets me know that he's not really helping the entirety of my lineups, right? So I see what you're saying, and maybe that's another indicator to look at.
So that actually like that just rose a point with me in the sense of maybe we utilize slate groups on the lineup builder for that, where we have 3 or 4 guys that we really want to try and build around, or we cleared out afterwards, or whatever. But
Yeah, yeah.
like so for that, I want to see how I can jam in Mixon, build a whole entire slate group with Mixon that's completely independent of whatever lineups you're trying to make. See how that works, and if it works, then you can transition that into your main lineup slate group. Go to a new slate group, figure out with Fournette, see how that works. So maybe you can utilize slate groups that way as a part of like finding those little gems and seeing if they work, and if they do or don't, do your main lineups that way.
Right, those guys that you can't fit in, you don't feel comfortable putting them in, but you also don't feel comfortable excluding them. Because literally every week, these guys that we've talked about that have broken the slate have been the last guys I've X'd out of my player pool. Like if I included them in the initial runs, we get down to it, and I can't get the rest of my exposures right. I was like, well, let me get rid of these running backs I don't like. I'm only getting 6 to 12%. Let me just get rid of them. I get rid of them. The rest of the exposures look fantastic. Cool, let's run it. Those guys proceed to score 57 fantasy points. So I see what you're saying. But yeah, it's again, and again, this is all recency bias because the last 3 weeks they've smashed. So I definitely get it, and I think it's all good points.
Yeah, and as Johnny points out, but TDs are very variant and somewhat similar to home runs in that they're hard to predict. Is that fair to say?
I think yes and no, right? Like obviously the model is really good at predicting home runs based on all the advanced metrics we have, but touchdowns are pretty. If in a game by game basis, yes, very difficult to predict. In a season long, and we know regression and how often players should be scoring touchdowns based on when and where their opportunities come from. Yes, that's easy to predict, but yes, in an individual game, a guy can project for 0.8 touchdowns, but he could score 3, he could score 0. So yeah, it's definitely tough, and there's a lot of variance involved.
Hashtag variance. Cool. So let's talk about some game stacks here. I know before the show you and I were talking. You wanted to talk a little bit about game stacks, so I'll let you have the floor there.
Yeah, obviously we get this question a lot, and we talked about it back in week 7, the whole game stack 3x1s, and we mostly see, there are some psychos like me who exclusively 3-1 game stack. That's all they do in their lineups.
Yes, ha ha ha, yes.
Yes, absolute sickos who exclusively 3x1 game stack. But then we see a lot of the really good pros, right? They mix it up some. But me, I'm more so. I'm not like always 3x1ing. This year was a little different, but sometimes I'll 2x1, and then with the more blowout spreads this year, we've been including more 3x0s. So this past week, the Daniel Jones, Jalen Hurts, both those guys can run. They were cheaper. I pretty much 2x1 stacked those guys. I did have a couple 3x1s. And then looking ahead to next week, week 13, we have a bunch of big favorites again. We know that big favorites aren't really conducive to 3x1 stacking. So we'll probably be more 3x0 stacking, which we know is a good play with big favorites. So those, I think, going back to a high level here, salary, can the quarterback run, and is the spread really large, should dictate if you stray away from 3x1s in tournaments.
Yeah. And I actually wanted to bring this point up. We talked about it a little bit in the Occupy staff chat when this tweet came out. Came out yesterday from some NFL writer. But Justin Herbert leads the league across all quarterbacks with a QBR, which is like ESPN's metric, 65.8. It wouldn't crack the top 50 season since 2006, and it's been the worst quarterback season since at least 2002. So like unprecedented
so
like awfulness in the passing game. And so like when you see a stat like that and you're like, man, all the passing like sucks hard. Like does that make you want to change any type of stacking down to a 2-1, 3x, or what else? More 3x0 or 2x1s? What do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we still see the data, right? We see the data and what the stacks mean and what the leverage it provides based on what the field does in top 1% rate. So I get it, but like it is frustrating on a week by week basis to see these quarterbacks we think are good just all of a sudden just have terrible games. And Herbert's a great example where he shredded the Steelers, who obviously were missing guys on defense, and then goes to Denver and just looks like he's never played quarterback before. Obviously, we have Mahomes being inconsistent this year, and all these quarterbacks just having terrible games from time to time and just completely imploding game stacks. To me, if I can find an underlying cause for it, why this year? Is it just pure
Yeah.
variance, or why is there something out there this year that quarterbacks as a whole are playing that much worse? I can't figure it out. I don't know what it is. If I did, then maybe we could draw some conclusions from that. But I actually haven't even read any like legitimate reasons as to why that might be the case. So again, we're still looking at the data and the game theory and what that provides, and that's still telling the same story. It's just that there's a lot more variance involved week to week because of how inconsistent some of these passing games have been.
Yeah, it's rough. It just seems like as a whole, and I know me and Wally were talking about it, but it just seems like there's so much less consistency, and that's what's just hard
It
to
is.
track.
It is.
It almost reminds me of the tweet you put out. I'm going real deep in the woods in the time machine here. Back when the XFL was on week 1, you put out a tweet
God.
that said, "This is the most profitable week if you have an edge on XFL." The biggest thing is, what is that edge?
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying, like
Yes.
what I'm trying to point
Yes.
out is the NFL is for some reason so different this year that if you can figure out what and why that's different and how to exploit that, you can crush.
Hey, if you guys know what it is, let us know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that's that fantastic reference, by the way. Yeah. Um, but again, the fundamental game of NFL hasn't changed, and that's what we can always fall back on.
Hmm.
It's the micro details that maybe there's an edge. So and again, this is all nitpicking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
All nitpicking, but that's what this show's for, right? To toss out ideas, try to find things that have changed, make adjustments if need be. Um, Theory craft, which is a word I've learned over the past year when it comes to esports and gaming. So yeah, that's what we're here for. So if you guys have ideas, certainly let us know in the comments.
Yeah. Definitely. Ed has a question here. Says, when building, are you basing your lineups on exposures or are you basing off the OF index projections? Are you looking to get the highest projection total or what? And that's a good question, Ed.
Really, really good question, and this applies to all sports because if you're looking at highest projection totals after building lineups, whether it's the OF index, which is built for tournaments, whether it's just a regular projection system, whether it's the best projections in the world, right? The raw projection's not going to tell you the story for a tournament lineup because it's not going to include correlation, right? Two guys could have the same projection value, same OF index value, but their inclusion in a lineup could change how good that lineup is and not affect the total projected points. And I mean by that is if you have a secondary stack, you have a receiver with a quarterback, running back with a defense. That is, if one does well, the other likely does well, does better as well. And the pure projection can't pick up on that. So I'm not necessarily trying to optimize for points. I'm just trying to optimize for, when I'm making 150 lines, I'm going to try to get all my exposures correct first, in addition to my stacks. And then trying to pick lineups after that, that's a tough task. I'm just trying to find the most correlation, the best combination of safety and upside, depending on the contest type.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need ownership? Do I not need ownership? A lot of different factors when it comes down to it. But the number one answer is I'm not necessarily looking to maximize projected points.
That makes sense. Yeah, I can definitely see that. So normally we stay here till 10:30, but we're going to stay here a couple minutes longer. So if you have questions, definitely go ahead and get them in the chat now. We're going to take a look we always take a look at some things here on the contest dashboard. So duplicates, like, I don't know why. Chris talked about it a while ago, but Houston was popular last week. I don't necessarily know why, but yeah, the most duplicated lineup was a Tyrod and Houston defense lineup.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Tyrod was incredibly popular amongst sharp players, and yeah, he was in the most duplicated lineup. This was definitely an optimized lineup, and a lot of these guys were pretty popular individually.
Definitely, yep. If we take a look at reports, the reports app here, we'll see 18.25% of all lineups had a tight end and flex, compared to 14% of the top 1%. So don't do that. Yeah, and of course it makes sense.
Running backs were a little bit better this week in the flex, right?
Yeah, 41% in the top 1% compared to 33 across all lineups. It helps when you have two running backs go for 40 points.
Yeah, that'll certainly help for sure.
Definitely, yeah. And if we take a look at the leaderboard, we always get to congratulate the winning lineup. Take a look here. Looks like good old Tommy Mack, 84, had a winning lineup. Had Stafford, Odell, Darrell Henderson, Mixon, and Fournette. That's always good.
That'll help.
Yeah. Waddle, Robbie Anderson, and Gronkowski, and rounded it off with Miami's defense.
Who would have ever thought that underperforming wide receiver Robbie Anderson would be in the Millie winning lineup? And it wasn't one of us. And he scored 4 points, by the way.
Two and a half.
2.5 points he scored. Not even 4. He scored 2.5 points and was in the winning Millie lineup. I was kind of following this. Just I think I pulled it up late and just to see who was at the top. And this guy, he actually won the Millie on Stafford's 300-yard bonus on like the last drive or something. So congrats to him. Yeah, really sick.
If we take a look at the person in second place, had an A-Rod and Randall Cobb stack, which is interesting. Leonard Fournette, Joe Mixon, Cordell Patterson, who apparently is also really good. I don't know why he's under 10% each week.
He's a beast.
Yeah, Quez with the 0.8%. It seems like this was a week where he only had four points. Seems like a week where a lot. I guess because with Fournette being 3% and scoring 50, you can afford to have a less than super cheap or super low owned player in your top lineup.
I mean, what it really, on these types of weeks when someone scores 40 plus, 30 plus, or whatever, really, when it really comes down to when you basically get two lineup spots with one guy, like Fournette gave you, mixed in to some extent, the rest of the lineup doesn't matter as much, right? You have to have these two guys on higher scoring. I mean, you're looking at Fournette scored 40 something, Mixon scored 30 something, and the winning DPP lineup was only 225, 224. Like we've seen Millie winning lineups 250 plus sometimes. So when you get less than 250 and you have a guy who puts up 50 and another guy who puts up 30 or 40, that's massively more important than literally anything else in the lineup. So again, we really can't build for these examples week in and week out.
Yeah, and as Justin talks about, they had the secondary 2x1 stack with Waddle and Miami defense running back with Robbie Anderson.
I mean, there's some of the stuff you can't justify. You can't justify it. And we got a comment on an older Millie Mission video earlier this week saying that these winners don't need our permission to make these lineups, and that person is very correct. Tommy Mack's $1 million richer, and of course, our approval of a lineup does not matter. But we could still try to entertain and educate.
Yep, exactly. And my offer still stands. I talked about it last week that if any Millie winner was to come on the podcast, we'll ask 10 questions, kind of like hot ones. We don't judge.
Yeah.
Just to figure out what your lineup process is. We will not judge. We do not care how you came with the lineup. Just to learn and let the people know. You get to plug whatever you want. And so, Tommy Mack, if you're listening and you want to do a couple questions for 5-10 minutes, hit us up.
Yes, sir.
A couple questions in here.
Okay.
First one from Ed says, first one from Johnny says, will there ever be a value in creating some type of correlation metric or score showing how correlated lineups are in the model after building?
Yeah, so like if you look on screen here, Johnny, like with this, I mean, I've agreed that we probably need something like that. I don't know what the best way to present that is or what the best metric would be. But like Fantasy Labs has this lineup trends like indicator, and it's kind of similar to our optimal lineup criteria in the single builder mode. Mm-hmm. So maybe we have something like that per lineup. I don't know, but I think something like that could be done. We just got to think about the best way and what would be useful to people. Yeah,
definitely. Ed says, I don't have the bankroll for 150 max. I've been working on 20 max every week. 2 questions. The $3 20 max is over 400,000 people. Am I insane for maxing that, even though it's 2 times the Millie field?
I'll start by saying yes. In fact, I think most 20 max is probably some of the worst bankroll contest types to play in large field, right? Because it gives you it, and this is it's a little worse than like large field single entry because you get people, 5,000, 10,000 players single entry or three max, right? These maximum entry limits give you the illusion of, oh, no one else can have more lineups than me, which is obviously a good thing, right? We always
Mm-hmm.
preach trying to max whatever contest you can play. But when you only have 20 of 400,000 lineups, right? That's just the crap. It doesn't matter how many, how many people have 20 lineups or whatever. Like that's a major crapshoot. And when you only have one lineup out of 5,000 for single entry, that's tough, right? It's going to take you a long while to realize your expected value. So, 150 max obviously is a different beast, but at least you get 150 cracks at it, and the percentage is a little bit higher of total lineups. So, really, what I would prefer to do is if you're focused on making 20 lineups, take those 20 lineups and insert them in a variety of small field contests, a variety of 1,000 player or less contests, and just go through all these different contests and just put your 20 lineups into those, because you have a much better chance of winning over the course of a season. Because you could 20 max a 400,000 player contest and not have a true expectation of your winnings for like 10 years. So
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking here. You could 20 max, and there's these winner take all contests, the 118 player leagues that are 3 entry max. You can put in 10 different lineups across different contests, and then maybe throw in a couple of satellites as well. So if they hit, it really goes off everywhere else.
yeah, so that's kind of what I've been doing for Showdown. It's what I did. If you guys saw the Discord last night, I won like 10 or 11K in Showdown last night. And what I normally do for Showdown, if I don't max the big GPP, right, the 150 max, I'll make 5 to 20 lineups, and I'll put it in, the 153 max, the 444 max, all the small 50 and $100 single entries. I'll put them in the 50 to 400 player satellites. I'll put them in the the $27 multipliers, like all these different size contests that are less than 1,000 players, and you still get your different exposures, 20 different lineups. But you don't have to beat hundreds of thousands of people to realize your winnings.
Exactly. Yeah. I love these. I'm actually just looking in the lobby now. For smaller bankrolls, they have these 25-cent contests that first is $10, second is $7.50, third is $5. So for people who are smaller bankrolls, and it's a 14 entry max. I think for a contest like that with 500 players, I think it's okay to not have to max that. You could throw in 2-3 lineups if you wanted to, 5 lineups.
For sure.
I think, yeah.
That's like a 475 player league or something, right? Roughly.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yep. And especially since it's under that mark, you're not going to get pros putting in 25 cents.
Exactly.
Yep. Let's see here. And it Ed says number 2. When looking at the guide, how deep do I go in the best of the rest right up for each position? I try to use quarterbacks from the top game stacks, but how many running backs, wide receivers, tight ends?
Yeah, we talk about it in the guide. In the guide, actually, how many running backs you want for 20 max or 150 max, and I don't even go that deep in the best of the rest that Chris puts in the plug. You don't have to get too deep, right? But he puts all the best plays in there that he thinks, and then you can obviously pick and choose and use tiebreakers, the model, ownership, whatever. But again, generally, if you have a player pool question, you're probably using too many players. Just as like an overall question to everybody who asked that.
Yeah, exactly. Mibaran asked, instead of looking at the top 1% of lineups that were entered, have you ever looked at the top 1% of actual potential combinations? Lineups not entered but would still have place there.
No, because generally you're getting just a mismatch of lineups, and I think this is a lot of people don't understand this concept, is the fact that we're not trying to score the most points in a GPP, which seems crazy, right? I know that seems like a foreign concept, but we're not trying to score the most points. We're trying to win, which is a different concept. If the top 1,000 possible lineups score 300 points, but the GPP winners are only scoring 100 points because the top 3,000 lineups or whatever were filled with low-owned players that no one ever play, that doesn't even matter to us, right? Like we don't need to land those. We just got to score 101 points. We don't got to score 300 points. So your goal is to beat the field, not necessarily score the most points. And it's two different concepts. So really what we're focused on is how do we beat the field, giving the ownership and lineup construction types on any given week, rather than try to score the most raw points, because that's not the goal. The goal is just to get first place, and it's not like there's a point threshold you have to meet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it like I track FanDuel ownership. I'm like literally the haha sickos guy. Like I track like hours every week tracking FanDuel Showdown. And one of the things I track is the winning points, and it goes from a minimum of 60 points to get first to 165 to get first. So looking at trying to maximize the points or minimize the point, like you definitely want to not focus on trying to get the most points, because that's very tough.
Yeah, so just like a very, very, very specific, like a very just general example that would never happen in real life. Well, let's just say we had 5 dudes that were 99% owned in FanDuel Showdown, right? Okay. Let's say they're all Lamar Jackson somehow. And they're all expected to score 20 points, right? So that would give your lineup 100 points if the projections hit. But again, they're 99% owned. And we have one guy who's 1% owned, projected to score 5 points, right? And if you use that player, right, obviously you're not maximizing for projected points, right? But if one of the 99% players gets hurt, this 5-point player gets into the optimal, that you're not scoring the most points that way that you possibly could in a projection, but you're beating the rest of the field because of what transpired with the ownership. So I don't know if I articulated that properly whatsoever, but basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize win probability, not maximize number of points.
Yep, exactly. So, Brian, it's 10:45 now. Any last lingering thoughts or anything else you want to talk about before we get up out of here?
No, I think we talked about a lot of good stuff on this episode. The Discord is always the best place to have these conversations. Ideally, not before 12:30 p.m. on Sunday. So, if you guys want to talk about this throughout the week, hop in the Discord. Let's chat it up. I still think we're all on the right track. We believe me, the stuff you see on the stream here every Tuesday is like just the tip of the iceberg of the stuff that we're tracking every single week. And if something major changes that we need to change in specifically my approach or in our approach, you guys will be the first to know. Most of the stuff you see here is us just talking about recency bias, recent things that have happened, any potential changes, but any major structural changes, obviously we'll communicate that. And we haven't found anything like that. So we're still on the right track. We're just waiting for the spike week.
Exactly, yeah. Hashtag Spike Week. Yeah, if you need me, you can always tag me in the Discord, and I'll definitely be happy to answer any questions that you all have. But until next time, Saturday is when you'll be able to catch us. Brian and I will be here for the breakdown of the next week in NFL. So until next time, Moose and Brian from OccupyFantasy.com. Have a good one.
Peace.